Good morning, everybody out in internet land. Welcome back to Hot Mess Life Coach, Season 3, Episode 4. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, because yes, that is too allowed. And this is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. I am here again today with my good friend and esteemed colleague, resilience coach, Morgan Barbret, who likes to help people bounce back. Good morning, Morgan. Welcome.
Good morning.
Today, we're going to be talking about the first agreement, which is based on the book, The Four Agreements. This is the first one, and it supports and underpins all the other agreements. Mo, do you want to tell our listeners what the first agreement is?
Yeah, so in the book, The Four Agreements, the author says that the first agreement is the most important because all the other ones kind of like are supported by it. But the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word, which is not just like being honest. Like when I first read the book, I thought that just meant be honest. But what it really means is like to use your words in support of yourself and other people, and to not use your words against yourself or against other people.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great way of conceptualizing it, because honesty, I think it's a Buddhist saying or a Zen saying where like honesty actually itself is a double-edged sword, because they say like make sure honesty passes through the three gates, right? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And is it true? And so being impeccable with your word doesn't always mean saying the honest thing, because it might not be necessary to say. It might not be kind to say. And it doesn't mean hold back the truth just because the truth is uncomfortable, but it means you can find a kind way of delivering the truth if it's necessary to deliver it. And if it's not necessary, just because you're irked by something, then it doesn't need to be delivered at all, because that's how powerful our words are. So I love that. It's about using the word to support yourself or using the word against yourself. Support or destroy, which is a lot more sort of in line with the concept of impeccability for me. So I love that. In fact, I looked up impeccable in the dictionary before this, just to sort of, because impeccable is one of those words that it's like, what exactly does it mean? And it actually means to have no flaws or to be perfect. That's what it says in like Merriam-Webster dictionary, to have no flaws or to be perfect. In the other online dictionary, it says, and this is the definition I really resonate with, it says, be free from fault or blame. So to me, this agreement is about transcending blame and the way we use our words to find fault and to blame, whether we're blaming ourselves for something, whether we're blaming other people for something, whether we're finding fault with ourselves, with our thoughts, whether we're finding fault with other people. And it's very powerful because we can use the word to create and perpetuate harmony instead of discord if we want to, but we can also use the word to destroy.
I didn't know that was a definition for impeccable, to be, without blame. I think that probably is the closest, definition to what the Toltec actually means by be impeccable. So I'm glad that you found that.
Yeah, no, totally. When I read it this morning, I was like, this is perfect, because honestly, like we do use the word to throw blame around all the time. And blame is actually one of those things that is entirely superfluous to forward motion. In the end, it doesn't actually matter who's to blame for what, usually, like especially when it comes to your personal, like the petty things in our lives. What really matters, like if someone's to blame and they're not taking responsibility and they're going to keep doing it over and over and over and over, okay, in that sense, maybe it's okay to understand that they're to blame so you can move away from them, but you don't need to make them aware that they're to blame. You know what I mean? Like that's their job. Like, so in that sense, like blaming with like the pointed finger and the angry whatever, like that's really antithetical to making progress. Instead, it's like, what's the solution? What's the answer? What's the way forward? Let's find a way out of this. Because with the exception of like oppression or toxic narcissism, you're gonna most often be dealing with people who regret the shit that happened. And so blaming them doesn't really matter. Like, it's like, let's all move on together. Let's find a way forward together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I've actually been thinking about the concept of blame like a lot lately, because I'm running a supportive communication workshop in the prison soon.
Oh, cool.
And when we talk about supportive communication, basically the argument for like avoiding blame is that when you place blame on another person, they're going to likely feel defensive or feel like there's an attack on their character, and that's going to shut a person down, whoever you're interacting with, especially in the sense that you might be interacting with people you care about, your friends, your family, your partner. If they feel like you're making an attack on their character, they're going to shut down and be less likely to want to work with you, be less likely to want to accommodate to whatever needs that you're expressing. And so when you place blame and you used your word against other people, then the potential for collaboration just dies.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, this is where it's so important, blame, because like we can use our word against other people by blaming them, which then totally shuts off all communication. And in the Toltec, they get into a little bit like the concept of casting spells and breaking spells with the word. Like the Toltec use that language not because they believe in fairy dust and Disney magic. It's not like that, but it's because they want us to understand how powerful our words are. And so the idea is that if I use my word to blame you for something, if you agree that you're also to blame and you decide to feel the same way about yourself that I say I'm feeling about you, like, oh, you're such an idiot who always makes mistakes and this was your fault, right? So that's me trying to cast a spell on you. And if you agree to it, then the spell is cast and now you're going to feel like a stupid, incompetent person for as long as you're under that spell. The other option, and they call that black magic. Misuse of the word is black magic. And then light magic is like using the word to break spells, where I could say like, everybody makes mistakes. I did that same thing 5 years ago when XYZ happened. And like letting you off the hook from the thing that you're probably already using the word against yourself in regard to anyway, and beating yourself up about anyway, which is why you would be so, you would have the proclivity to agree with it so readily because you're already feeling it about yourself. So it's like if we're using the word against ourselves, like, oh, I'm not good enough. I don't feel like I measure up. Like I feel like I'm a fraud, like, which is sometimes how I feel showing up online to share wisdom with people. Cause I'm like, what the hell do I know? You know what I mean? So if I'm feeling that way and using the word against myself already in that way, and then you come along from the outside and say, you know what, you're not good enough, I'm going to agree with you because I already kind of feel that way or something. And then the spell is cast. But if you were to say, like last week, I remember actually this moment suddenly now where I was talking about my baldness and I was like, you said, you're not just enough, you're wonderful. And I was like, I'm not quite ready to believe that yet. But that was you using your word in support of me, not to like compliment me, not to make me feel better, but it was breaking a spell actually that I was under. You know what I mean? And like that's how powerful it is. Like your genuine ability to see the wonder in me makes it more likely and more possible that I'm going to be able to see the wonder in me, which is the flip side of blame. It's I don't know what you would call it. Like the word phrase coming to my mind is like letting people off the hook all the time. But why not? Like hooks are not comfortable. Mm-hmm. We don't need to hang on them.
I think the opposite of blame is support.
Yeah, beautiful.
You touched on something that actually really ties into the first agreement when you said that you weren't ready to hear what I had said last week, which was that you were wonderful, and that
now I'm ready now. Say it again.
Right. Well, you are wonderful. When you said I wasn't ready to hear that, this book talks about how your mind is like fertile soil for the words that we receive, but it's only fertile for different things. So depending on how you use the word for or against yourself, you're going to be more likely to be able to receive or plant seeds of words that are more compassionate or more blame oriented. So if you're constantly using the word against yourself and blaming yourself, then your brain will be more likely to grow seeds of blame than seeds of compassion, seeds of support. And so that's part of what makes it so important to be watching how we use our words and be impeccable with it as much as we can, because the more that we are impeccable with our word, the less likely that our mind is going to grab onto and grow a forest of blame.
Yeah, exactly. That. What did you call it before we got on? The garden of thoughts or something? The mind garden, I think is what you said.
Yeah, mind garden.
Yeah. And I think this is such a concept because the mind garden, it's like the Toltec talk about all the words as being seeds, right? And seeds, if your soil is ready for the seeds of love, then when you hear them, they're going to sink in more deeply. So, like last week, my soil wasn't as ready for the seed of wonder as it is today. And so now that's why I'm trying to say it again to me, because like the seed broke fallow ground last week, and now there's more nutrient about my wonderfulness, even saying it to you now, I'm like, I'm good with it. Yeah, you're great. You're good, Bri. You are wonderful, hair or no hair, and like, that's just one small thing. So that might not have been a belief that was super deeply embedded, but even the ones that are deeply embedded with enough tilling of the ground, suddenly those seeds of love and seeds of truth can take root. But it's like an analogy would be like in a desert, a cactus can grow because that's the kind of soil that's right for it. But a cactus is sharp and pointy and it hurts. You know what I mean? Those might be like the seeds of fear. And then in a garden where the soil is soft and fertilized and rich, like that's where the flowers can grow and the fruits can grow and all the sweet things that are delightful and fun to eat, and like it takes practice changing your mindset. And the first line of defense is being impeccable with your word, because that begins to change your mindset. Then you can allow the words of others that are not in line with your type of soil will bounce off. That's the thing too, like, because your soil won't be right for them. So like if I'm tilling my soil to be the soil of love, the soil of truth, the soil of support, the soil that's like transcends blame, and then somebody tries to like throw blame on me, I'm going to be like, well, that's just your stuff. And it's going to bounce off because like my soil, that kind of seed can't grow in my soil. Sorry, like whether you throw it at me or not. But if I'm constantly blaming myself, then that seed can take root and sink deep and grow into a tall, blamey oak tree or cactus, to stick with the metaphor.
Yeah. And another way that I guess the blamey seeds can get planted that I've seen a lot is like there are plenty of people who have adapted a coping skill of making self-deprecating jokes, which isn't necessarily 100%. It's not like bad in itself, but to be aware of the fact that when you make self-deprecating jokes, your subconscious mind still, even if your conscious mind doesn't take it seriously and they're like, no, I don't actually, hate myself, your subconscious mind takes some of that personally, and it does plant some of those seeds to make you more susceptible to receiving blame, receiving negativity about yourself from other people. So what it actually does, rather than help you like feel okay with yourself, is it makes you vulnerable to more negative feelings towards yourself.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's like, as you talk, I'm like, oh, yeah, because I do that. I make those self-deprecating jokes sometimes. And it's true. Sometimes it comes from a place of like, okay, that's a thing I've transcended. And so I can talk about it now and it doesn't trigger me. But other times it comes from a place of like, I'm actually dealing with that and I want to put it out there so someone else can tell me it's okay. Which then if they don't tell me it's okay, puts me in a very weak position.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right on. Like, we've gone into this pretty deep, but I want to make it really clear what we mean by the word for everybody out there listening. So like the word, it's not just a sound. It's not just like the language. It's the power we have to create, to communicate, and to express ideas. And so the word manifests in many ways. We've already touched on this a little bit, but like the word can be spoken out loud, but it can be internal as just thoughts. It can also be the written word. It can be directed at yourself and it can be directed at other people. So there's all of these sort of ways the word manifests. And it's not just the idea that there's language. It's the idea that words carry the power to communicate ideas. And so it's an energetic connection. And the Toltec talk about using the correct use of your word is using your energy in the direction of truth and love for yourself, which then makes you a conduit for truth and love for other people. So we're not just talking about words in like the clinical sense or like the literary sense. Like we're talking about words in the energetic sense that they create connection. that they create community, that they create ideas that can then live on for long periods of time, which is why the tilling of the soil thing is so important because, you know, if we want ideas, new ideas, countercultural ideas that, hey, I get to rest and play. Hey, I get to relax. Hey, I get to love myself. All of these things that are not part of our culture, if we really want them to take root in us and grow deep and change the way we live our lives, then we have to have soil ideas, which is where there's less room for self-deprecating jokes and maybe even less room for falling asleep to TV shows about serial killers, you know, like we could go any which way with it, but it's like we want to cultivate that fertile mind soil that's ready for the new ideas to take root more deeply.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we tend the soil of our brains to have it be more suitable for things that are loving and supportive than things that are self-deprecating and blamey, criticizey, judgy?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. I think a big part of it for me comes with humility and not rushing. It's like I think we talked about this last week, but awareness is a big part of it. Like in the Toltec work in general, they're always talking about making yourself more aware because awareness is the key to transformation and like how to become more and more aware. Like even in the
Like
chapter,
aware of your thoughts? Like
aware
the
of your
thoughts?
yeah, aware of your thoughts, aware of your patterns, aware of your behaviors, aware of any sort of unconscious trigger. Because even in the first chapter on the first agreement, or I think it's chapter 4, but whatever, the chapter on the first agreement, they talk about how we use words to hook our attention, right? Like to hook it, and our attention is the energy we use to make things happen. Like what we focus on is what it sort of expands, right? And so in terms of like how do we use the word better, like I think it's like slowing it down, like in that moment when I'm ruminating on something and I'm being like, okay, so you know my teacher dinged me on this comma, and so now I hate them and now they're this type of person and XYZ or whatever. It's like, okay, stopping in that moment and saying, first of all, what am I saying that losing 2 points on this paper means about me? And is that thing that it means about me even true? And stop interrupting it right there. So if that's not true, then do I have to go down the whole rabbit hole of like defining the teacher as something awful and terrible? So then I'm putting myself in hell in more than one way. I'm putting myself in hell with my word by saying I don't measure up because I got a 96 instead of 100. And then I'm putting myself in hell again by saying that teacher's out to get me or they're incompetent or where did they get their degree, from a Cracker Jack box or whatever it is. Like so like those it's two firing two cylinders that are not impeccable. But if I'm not aware of that, because that's normal, that's what we normally do. Normal doesn't mean natural, it means commonplace, so it's not our true nature to do that, but it is our true culture to do that. And so it's like finding a way back to our true nature, which once we are practiced at that will be the more natural thing to do. And using my word to come down on myself and rail against my teacher would actually start to seem foreign to me, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
100%.
So
When you say slow down and like be aware of your thoughts, it reminds me of this like question that Eckhart Tolle, I love Eckhart Tolle, encourages readers to ask in one of his books. He says, you can ask yourself, what will my next thought be? And what that, like, obviously we can't control all of our thoughts. We have like 10,000 thoughts a day. But to ask that question not only makes you aware of like, what were you just thinking, but what direction do I want to head? It gives you a chance to kind of select something that could be a little bit more impeccable, a little bit more kind than perhaps your brain would go into had it been unsupervised.
yeah, that's so good because that again goes to awareness. Like, what will my next thought be? Stops you from being in autopilot thinking or
Mm-hmm.
daydream land. And oftentimes, what we call daydreams is really like daymares because we're not really dreaming of something pleasant. We're either worrying about the future or we're gossiping about somebody in our head. And so, asking yourself what the next thought will be, it's amazing because it puts you into the present moment automatically, where you can be aware of what's going on around you. And I love that you said we have 10,000 thoughts a day, and so we're not going to be able to control our thoughts, because even though impeccability is about really using the word carefully, I don't even think the Toltec are trying to say control and arbitrate every one of your thoughts. I
No,
think
that would be
actually,
so stressful. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
That's
that
not
would be way too stressful. Agreed. And so it's like the, the whole Toltec, the power in all of this Toltec work is about giving us back the choice, like whether to agree with what's happening or not, like internally. Like, and so what's my next thought going to be is a way of slowing down. And then when you start noticing the thoughts flying by in your head, now you're noticing them. And instead of, you don't need to try to control them or stop them. You just get to look at them and say, do I agree with that one? No. Okay, fine. It's okay to keep thinking it. Like, it's okay for it to be there, because once you slow down and notice it and you hold it for a second and say, okay, this one, I don't agree with it. This one says I'm supposed to have a knee jerk reaction every time someone criticizes me. Okay, well, I don't agree with that. So you hold that there. And then you realize you don't agree. And that takes the power away from that thought. So a couple things happen. The thought comes around a lot less, because the thoughts are little ego bombs and they like to be seen and danced in front of you and agreed with. And so when you stop agreeing with them, they're going to go find some other human mind to go to that will agree with them. And what that's going to cause you to do is then not have knee-jerk reactions as often every time someone criticizes you, because you decided, I don't agree with that thought. That came from culture. Culture says I'm supposed to get outraged at the drop of a hat.
yeah.
That doesn't feel like me. So I'm not going to agree with that. So the thoughts can come through all they want, and we just have the power to say, I agree, I disagree, I agree, I disagree.
Absolutely. The thing that's reminding me of is like right at the end of the chapter on being impeccable with your word. Uh, he says, by being impeccable with your word, you can live in like your mental form of heaven in the middle of thousands of people living in hell, because you become immune to that hell. So the more that you practice being impeccable with your word towards yourself and towards other people, the less susceptible you're going to be to either other people's criticism, other people's judgment, or, I mean, other people's misery, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It goes back to the sort of the mind garden thing again. And that reminds me of this other concept where it's like, if you let your body become so unhealthy, you actually get to a point where when you start to put nutrients in your body, that those seem like a foreign substance to your body, that it will reject the uptake of the nutrients. And so it actually becomes much harder for you to turn it around and infuse your body with nutrients again. So if
Same thing
you
with exercise. If you don't exercise for a really long time and then you try to exercise again, you're going to feel like you're injured.
yeah, exactly. I'm going through that right now. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we got to keep the mind fertile soil. So I'm wondering, I guess this just popped into my head, but like, what are some things that you do to try to keep your mind garden fertile for the thoughts of love, beauty, and truth?
Hmm. I think for me, I know that there are, beliefs or thoughts that have been shared with me like by other people that make me feel really terrible, that, like very actively dampen, my hope and my joy for like life. And I think noticing where that's coming from, like naming it and almost like preparing myself to be around those people, or to like almost like not like putting your armor on, but basically being like, I know that this person is probably in a negative headspace. And I can expect them to be in a negative headspace. And that doesn't have to be, I don't have to agree with or believe everything that they share. I know that they feel discouraged. I know that they feel pessimistic. I don't have to agree with that. I don't have to take everything that they say as truth, even if they're in a position of authority over me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it gets into another concept of like empathy, where just because we don't agree with somebody's negativity or pessimism doesn't mean we have to shut off feeling empathy for them. Like, I'm not saying that
Right.
you said that. You didn't say that. I just wanted to clarify it for everybody out there,
Mhm.
because it's like because you brought up the concept of armor really briefly there for a second. And it's like there is a way to walk through the world in full agreement with your belief and truth that the universe is benevolent and kind and supporting you and all of that good stuff, and hold space for people who don't yet understand those same truths or might
Yeah,
never.
or if that's not their experience. Yeah. No, I think for a long time, when other people around me were struggling and were being really unkind to themselves, I, in an effort to be empathetic, started taking on some of those same beliefs and started like absorbing it because I was trying to be, supportive and validating. But what ended up happening was I ended up just feeling the same level of horrible as they did. And it took me out of my ability to be be supportive and be helpful in a way that could, be loving towards them because I was no longer in my own loving energy.
Yeah, that's amazing, because that's actually like an example of. I mean, you tell me where I'm wrong here, but that sounds like spell casting. Like what the Toltec would call spell casting.
Yeah.
Like they were casting their spells on you with their pessimistic beliefs, and then you were like, even though it was from this good place of love and wanting to be empathetic, you were like, okay, I'm gonna dive in there and see your point of view, which then puts the power of your agreement
Yeah.
into the belief. And then once you agree, you're trapped in hell, and then you're like, how do I what is this little box that I've put myself in? So how do
Yeah.
you break out?
I think for me, like noticing how each thought affects my mental state, like makes it kind of motivating to really want to be picky, to really want to like find the ones that feel loving, find the ones that feel free. Obviously, we can only really work with the ones that we can, reasonably believe. But if I look at like what are my options, how can I interpret, what's going on here? Like right now I'm house hunting. And I have moments where, my word is not impeccable. And I think things like there are no options and we're going to be stuck renting indefinitely. And I can't believe how much this costs. And I hate this process. And I don't want a house because this sucks, blah, blah, blah. But, as we were saying earlier, or as I was talking to you before we hopped on this call, I was like, you know, I we're gonna find something at some point, which doesn't immediately sound a ton, more positive, but I believe that. And if I focus on that piece of I believe we're gonna find something that we like at some point, rather than I hate house hunting, this freaking sucks. I don't want anything to do with it. It puts me in a different mental state. And so I pick the one that works for me, I guess.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that, because it's like you can't. This actually brings up another exercise that Martha Beck taught us that we'll share with people now as we end. But the what you just said, like, I hate this process of house hunting. It's not going to be possible for you to suddenly pick the belief, I love this process of house hunting. Like, that's because it's not true. It doesn't feel true.
I don't believe that. I don't love it. I'm not going to jump into my negative,
Yeah,
spell
yeah,
casting.
yeah. No, no, totally. But because it doesn't feel true, and so like the thing is that it's the truth that sets us free, not toxic positive thinking. Like the truth, but the truth can be
Mhm.
different. The truth, even something slightly more neutral than negative, is still the truth. Like so, I hate house hunting is a lot more hellish of a thought than house hunting will be temporary in my life, which that feels truer than
Mhm.
I love house hunting, right? House hunting doesn't feel true. Maybe you're not
Yes.
cut out for house hunting and you're never going to love it, but also it won't last for decades, and that feels truer. And so this brings me to the exercise that I want to share with everybody. This is more like a silver bullet than an exercise, but here's what it is. Martha Beck came up with this phrase that she's taught to us a number of times, and I just want to share it with everybody here, because this is a phrase you can use whenever you're dealing with any sort of anxious thoughts or negative thoughts or anything like that, where you notice yourself being pulled down into the dream of hell, into the feelings of hell, like the hellscape that is planet Earth sometimes, that seems like it could be planet Earth. So this is a phrase that tends to ring true for almost everybody that says it. And here's the phrase. I'm just going to share it to you right now. It is, I am meant to live in peace. And the beauty of this phrase is that it's not saying I live in peace, which might not be true. It's not saying I should live in peace, which has to it. It's not saying I might live in peace, which has uncertainty about it. It's talking about destiny. It's pointing you towards your natural state of being, which is peace, whether you feel the peace now or not, by saying, I am meant to live in peace. And I've used this a lot of times. And so I would just encourage all of you out there, when you're feeling some kind of way, get calm, get still, take a deep breath, and then whatever you're thinking about, put it on hold for just a second and say, I am meant to live in peace. And when you say it, tune into what it shifts inside you. What happens to your shoulders? What happens to your stomach? What happens to your chest? What happens to your brow, your temperature, your heart rate? And you'll start to notice, very likely, subtle or maybe even drastic shifts from a down throttle, from whatever you were feeling, into a little bit more of like a, because it's true. You were meant to live in peace, even if you don't, even if you don't know how, even if you can't possibly see how. Your body knows you were meant to, because all of the plants do, all of the animals do, and we are no exception, except that we have language and culture and it gets in the way. So with that said, Mo, do you have you used we are meant to live in peace?
Yeah, well, and on a broader scale, I've kind of just adopted this belief that Martha shares, which is that when something is really true, it feels like freedom rather than feels like stress. Like usually stress is created by, a feeling of resistance. And so when we have blamey, non-impeccable thoughts, there's a level of resisting the fact that we are meant to live in peace, or that we're good enough as we are. All these things that are hard to believe now because we've been socialized into believing that there's something wrong with us. But when I settle into thoughts that feel like freedom, then I believe those things to be true.
Yeah, beautiful. So we're going to end there for today, everybody. Contemplate your own thoughts of freedom. Contemplate your own destiny of living in peace. And we'll be back next week to talk a little bit more about the 4 agreements and hopefully dive deep into the second agreement, which is to not take anything personally. I know, sounds impossible, right? So tune in next week and we'll talk about how that's done. In the meantime, you can follow Morgan on Instagram at Morgan_Barbret. And you can learn more about her and her available coaching services on her website, Self-Love Atlas Coach. And if you want to find out more about me and what I do, you can do that at thebrianhogan.com. You can find more information there, or to learn about my coaching services. And in the meantime, we'll see you all next week for episode 5 on Thursday, May 4th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love. Bye, everybody.
Bye.